Hi, I'm Sandy Heltzinger. This session is for schools that are wanting to get started with using Brightpath. What is Brightpath? It's tempting to think of Brightpath as software, but Brightpath is about professionally developed assessments that give you data that will inform your teaching and give you immediate feedback to use with your students. The software just helps us get that data to you quickly and in a way that makes it really easy for you to use. Within Brightpath, we have our writing assessments and our maths assessments. The assessment methodology used in the writing is going to be quite different, so I need to explain to you how to assess using the Brightpath writing methodology. The maths assessments are actually quite familiar in that it's multiple choice and short answer questions. But importantly, we provide a range of reports that really allow you to evaluate school progress, evaluate student growth and learning, that give you the information to inform your teaching immediately. I'm going to just give you a quick overview of our assessments so that you know which ones you might want to use. So we have narrative, persuasive and information report writing. These go from pre-primary to year 9. We also have 2 scales that work for the early years, recount writing and an oral narrative. And then there are 2 other scales that you might like to play with, the book review and the science investigation. In the maths, we have 52 tests for you to use. So number and algebra, measurement and geometry, and stats and probability, we have a range of tests for pairs of years. And then we also provide a combined or general maths test. I'm going to now focus on the writing assessments. It makes sense. There are 3 stages to the writing assessment. You collect the students' performances, you assess them, and then you use the reports. In terms of collecting the performances, this is really exactly how you would do assessments within your class, nothing too different. You give the students a prompt and they respond to the prompt, and then you have their work sample. We do provide admin guidelines and sample tasks for you to use, and these are just to help you explain sort of the parameters in which you want to administer the task. It's important to use these parameters if you're wanting to collect whole school data. We give you a range of prompts. So this is an example of the narrative prompt. Another of the narrative prompts. Now you can use our prompts or you can use your own. Ours are just there to help you should you wish to use them. We explain to you how to administer the task, and this is the time allocation that we suggest. But it's important that you realize Brightpath is about good classroom practice. So if students need a bit more time, give them a bit more time. If they need a bit more support, give them that support. You want to give them the right level of support that will elicit a typical performance from them. You don't want to impede their performance and you don't want to over-enhance their performance. We provide a planning template that you could use, and this comes from our experts' advice that if students, when writing a narrative, really understand what their complication is, their stories immediately have momentum. Again, you're free to use whichever planning template you like for your students. This is an example of the prompts for persuasive writing for upper primary, lower secondary, where we also give the students just a few facts to help them set up their persuasive argument. And for the older students, this is the planning template that we suggest for persuasive writing, which has been designed to really encourage students to expand their arguments and sort of really expand upon their thinking in their persuasive piece of writing. But again, you're free to use whichever planning template you prefer. For the information report writing, students research a topic and they make notes. They can't copy anything verbatim, and then they come back a little while later and use those notes to write an information report. Now, there are 2 ways that you can collect your students' performances. They can be handwritten performances or typed performances. So obviously for the younger students, it needs to be handwritten. And then we recommend that you scan and upload their performances so that the performances are within the software. For older students who are ready to type, they can type into the Brightpath platform and the work is captured. There's an important aspect to the type performance that I will explain in a little while. Now all our documents are within our knowledge base. So once you've logged in, click on the knowledge base, you'll find guides to the software, the administration guidelines, and guides to making your judgments. So having collected the performances, I now need to talk to you about assessing their performances. And it's at this point that I think it's useful I actually step away and talk about the software, because it's within the software that you'll be assessing their performances. So you will have your, well, let me explain. When you are new to Brightpath, use the first time using Brightpath. Go in and set your password. You'll see it's very straightforward. If you don't receive an email message, it means that your details are not within the software and you'll need to speak with your administrator. So that'll be someone in your school. Once you've logged in, this is our landing page. Now all teachers can see the assessment component. Only school admin can see the school management component. And it's really very logical. You set up your assessment, you can view your assessments, you can view all assessments in the school, and then you can view the reports. So when you click Set up an assessment, you're taken to this series of steps where you're going to select your learning area, your terms and students, the scale or the assessment that you're going to use. In the case of writing, you'll select or provide a task, and then you select your assessor. So let's select English. Now that opens up the page that allows me to select my students. So I'm looking at classes taught by Kellyanne, and I can either see her classes or I can see all English classes or show all classes. And the class lists open up. So then it's a matter of selecting the students that you want to assess. And now, because we're in the English section, or the writing section, we're going to select the scale. So you'll see the full list of scales, and we'll select the narrative scale. It's at this point that you can select one of our tasks, you can enter your own task, or you can upload a PDF of your task. When students complete the writing online, that task is displayed for them. You then select the assessor, and this is most probably going to be you. We recommend that teachers set up their own projects, their own assessments, and select themselves. It all then flows really well. Now, there are a couple of features I'd like to talk about. Sometimes schools would like to divide marking between teachers, so you could select 2 or 3 assessors, and then the program will randomly split the marking between those 3 assessors. We don't allow double marking. You also have a feature where you can hide the student names when you're scoring if you're wanting not to be influenced by students' names as you're assessing their work. And then simply create the assessment. Now it's at this point that you determine whether your students are going to work online and type their performances, whether you're going to scan and upload their performances, or whether you're going to assess without adding work. We thoroughly recommend that you scan and upload or you have your students write online, because that performance stays with the score over time. And once you're looking at and wanting to evaluate, do the moderation sides of your assessment, it's really useful to have the student work with the score. It's at this point that if you're scanning and uploading, you drag and drop your student performances into the software, and then you can always edit. So if anything, you want to change anything in your assessment, you can just select the edit button. If your students are writing online, you are given a unique participation code and a URL code or site link. The students click on that link and they enter the participation code, and then they identify themselves by their name and their date of birth. If the date of birth does not match the date of birth that we have in Brightpath, they'll need your help. So that's all really straightforward. So if you could imagine, you've collected your students' performances, you've gone into the software, and you've either had your students complete online or you've uploaded their samples. Now it's time to think about assessing them. Within Brightpath, we've developed an assessment methodology which requires a comparison of your students' performance to the calibrated exemplars. It's a matter of working along the scale and seeing which exemplar your student's work is closest to, or which two it falls between. Now, when you're making this judgment, it's an on-balance judgment, and you need to take into account both the authorial choices and the conventions. The authorial choices being those aspects of writing where students are free to manipulate their writing for effect. So character and setting, persuasive devices, those are all aspects of authorial choices. The conventions are where students have rules that they have to follow. Here are the exemplars for the narrative. As you can see, we start very low and we'll go all the way up to Year 9 writing. As a teacher, there are only going to be 5 or 6 exemplars that you really need to know well, because that's where most of your students' level of performance will be. So whilst 20 odd exemplars may seem a little overwhelming, remember that you will be working within a smaller range. So just to reiterate, it's an on-balance judgment that you need to make. The authorial choices include subject matter and ideas, vocabulary and descriptive language, tone, style and voice, and text structure. The conventions are spelling, punctuation, correct formation of sentences, clarity of referencing, paragraphing. When you're making that on-balance judgment, you're really trying to decide what's the best fit, which is the exemplar that is my student performances closest to. Now, whilst you can be making your judgments within the software, we recommend that you do a lot of this work with hard copy. In the knowledge base, you'll find a copy of our guide to making judgments, where you have each exemplar and an explanation of that exemplar. Time spent now getting to know the exemplars well is time really well spent. It will mean that your judgments are more accurate, and it'll mean that you'll become a lot quicker with your judgments. When you're in the software and in all our reports, we do provide detailed performance descriptors. These descriptors arise from the empirical research we do to calibrate the Brightpath scale. But it's really important that you use these to help you understand the learning and what you're looking for, but that you don't turn them into a checklist. You get your good data from a comparison of your students' performance with the exemplar. We do also provide you with the average performances, which will give you a sense of, if I'm a Year 3 teacher, where on the scale should I be starting to look at. So that gives you a useful point of reference. As a school, I think anything that you can do to print off and have hard copy is really valuable. So if you could imagine running a staff meeting where you have the exemplars printed out and teachers bring 2 or 3 samples from their class and they work together, reading the exemplars, reading their performances and deciding where their performance matches. They will very quickly then understand the assessment methodology and the comparison to exemplars. As I mentioned, we have our guides to making your judgments, which for every exemplar we provide a detailed annotation of the strengths and weaknesses of the performance. My advice would be to ensure that every teacher has a hard copy to hand so that they can work with the hard copy and analyse the exemplars closely. Now, for those of you whose students are ready to type, there actually is a little advantage for you, because the program analyses the student work and provides a predictive score. So in this instance, the score's been predicted at 520, and it might fall within the range of 500 and 540. Now, it's really important that you appreciate the limitations of what a computer can do. The computer is not going to be a good reader of student stories. So the teacher needs to go in and check, actually, is this marking correct? Or is there something particular in this performance that means it's been overmarked or undermarked? A very long performance with very varied vocabulary could well be overmarked. A short but very clever piece with humour or great use of satire could possibly be undermarked. So the teacher does need to make the final decision about the score and either amend it or agree with it and enter the score. So just some useful strategies for when you're assessing using Brightpath. We've found read work aloud. It's amazing how the ear picks up the standard of work, and it's useful to work in pairs. Sort hard copies into 5 bundles, lowest to highest. That starts to give your bearings as to where you're going to be looking on the scale. And as you're comparing performances of a similar standard with the exemplars, your scoring will get quite quick. Decide where each script fits on the scale. Have the booklet in front of you. And perhaps write down your scores, so once you're entering the scores into the software, you don't have to go through deciding on your what score you gave. Now, some scripts may fit between exemplars. Have a look and decide, is it slightly better, is it slightly weaker? You might also look at the commentaries and the descriptors, but don't feel too anxious about whether it should be a 300, a 310 or a 320. You're working at a very fine level of scale, and those scores are very close. We'd recommend you check and review in clusters, and there's a way that you can do that in the reports in the performance profile. And if needed, add individual notes or add notes to individual scripts. So a little bit about moderation. Obviously, Brightpath has an inbuilt moderation process because you're comparing all performances in the school to the same set of calibrated exemplars. But there are other ways that you can actually also ensure that you're marking very consistently across the school. We strongly recommend that you do some across year level moderation. So where you have teachers in years 2, 3, 4 coming together, looking at each other's scores and seeing if you agree. And then also do some moderation within year levels. Have some year level teachers mark 3 of the same samples and compare scores. Have differing year level teachers mark 3 different samples and discuss scores. Use the physical ruler. It's so important. Use reports to compare samples with the same scores. And consider use of the Brightpath marking service. Now, with that service, it's where our expert markers will mark and provide feedback. So, we certainly don't want you to be incurring extra expense. There's much that you can be doing to check the marking within your own school, but occasionally you might like an external point of reference. Once you're in the software, it becomes very easy to compare your performances. So the display that we're looking at now is our performance profile. Just sitting underneath the sample of work, you can see the Brightpath scale. To the left are the calibrated exemplars, and to the far left are performance descriptors. On the right are where students have been placed on the scale. So we can see 4 students that have been given the same score. Because their work sample is associated with the score, You can click on each student, look at the work and see if their performances are of a similar standard. So it becomes a very quick way of checking your marking and that you've been marking consistently. I want to reiterate, a score difference of 20 score points still means you're marking at a very close standard. So don't feel too hung up. If somebody's marked a performance at 300 and you would have marked it at 340, then it is important to get in and try and understand the marking. So I've explained to you the how you assess and collect performances with the writing and how you've used the software. Now the software, when I stepped you through the software, that's all the same process that you use for the maths. The maths assessments, you collect your students' performances online. So they complete their students online, they complete their work online, and we have an automated marking and instant feedback feature. The assessments cover years 2 to 9, and as I mentioned, we cover the 3 strands: number and algebra, measurement and geometry, stats and probability, as well as general assessments. This will give you a sense of the questions that we pose students. We've tried to keep the tests looking really engaging contexts and, so that the tests look nice. When students are completing the tests, they can actually have the questions read out aloud. Where we've used any vocabulary that might be unfamiliar to the students, such as bathing puppies, we have an illustration. Here's some of our measurement and geometry questions. Now, when you go into the software, remember last time we selected English, this time we're going to select maths. You find your class, you select your students, and then you have a choice of which strand you want to, or which scale you want to assess. Number and algebra, measurement and geometry, general, or stats and probability. That takes you to the range of tests that you can choose from, and you have the opportunity to preview the tests. Now, there's an important thing that I need to explain. The students don't know which year level test you're giving them. So you could give an easier test to weaker students and a harder test to your more able students. All their data comes back onto the same scale. So your reports are valuable. You can be comparing students within your class, but what you're doing is being able to give tests that are targeted to their ability range. You're wanting to give your students a test where they get about 5 or 6 items correct, or 3 or 4 items incorrect. You're wanting to find the point at which students will fall away from the test, because that helps you work out what their next teaching points are, their zone of proximal development. So, if I mentioned you can preview the tests, so you click on preview and it'll take you to a view like this. And what you can see is you can click through every question and know the questions that your students are going to have to answer. And that'll allow you to determine which is the most appropriate test to give your students. Just as with the writing, you get a unique participation code in the URL link, and you open the test for your students. They go in and they enter their name, their date of birth, and they're good to go. Now, the program for maths is monitoring the students, and if it picks up that that's got to a point where they're falling away, they're not very unlikely to get any more questions right, it'll say, you've done well, you can stop now. Once you close your tests, your students are immediately ready to look at their own results, see how they went, and of course you've got data for your class. So the final thing that I want to talk to you about is the reports, because of course the reports is the whole purpose of collecting assessments. I'll start by speaking about the maths specific reports. As soon as your students have finished their maths reports, you will get a report that shows you how the students went on each of the questions. You can see the students who got it right, the students who got it wrong, and the students who got it wrong, but it's their zone of proximal development. They're highlighted in orange. So that's going to be the questions that you're going to want to look at and plan for your teaching tomorrow. These are the things that the students got wrong, but actually it's within reach. And if I focus on teaching these skills and understandings, they should master the skills quite quickly. For individual students, you can see how individual students went. So in this, the ribbon down the bottom, the greens are the questions the student got right. The red are the questions the student got wrong. And the red highlighted in orange are the student's zone of proximal development. So these are the things that this individual student is ready to learn next. The students go in and they get the same report, but it's written for them. So they can see how they went on every question. They can see what they got right, what they got wrong, and what their zone of proximal development is, or the questions that they're going to be working on and focusing on next. Then for both writing and maths, we have a full suite of reports. So when you go into the reports, it'll take you to this landing page and you'll see that we've got reports that provide formative assessment information, summative assessment information, and growth reports. There's a generic report with results, and this gives you the students and their scores. Now have a look at, when you're in this, have a look at the filters. You'll see that for some of the writing scales, for narrative and persuasive, and for the math scales, you can get a NAPLAN equivalent score, and in some instances you can get grades. You can export this report and upload it into your school management systems. So then in terms of formative reports, we have the performance profile. The students are plotted against the Brightpath scale. This is where you open the performances and check your marking. The descriptors are the things that the student can do. And we flip that, so we provide it in great detail also for the maths. And then we flip it and also provide teaching points. We bring it all together in a table like this, so it's easy for you to extract the information and include it in your planning documents. Spend a few minutes thinking through, brainstorming, what are all the ways you can be using this report to make a difference for your students. It's going to save you time, report comments, feedback to students, lesson planning, scope and sequence documents. There's a myriad of ways that you can use this information to save you time and to help you to be more effective teachers. We have the student growth report, which plots the students over time, so you can see where they were the first time they were assessed and all subsequent times. We also provide pre- and post-test reports so that you can see the performance of the students the first time you assessed them, the second time you assessed them, and how much growth they've made. And then we provide a range of reports to help you evaluate your whole school performance. And then the final suite of reports that we provide are reports for parents and reports for students. So the report for parents you can print off and send home or include in your end of semester reports. The report to students you can give them as part of their feedback and any sort of differentiation that you're doing within your classroom. Having shown you all this, I want to just now ignite your imagination. If you're following Lynn Sharrett's work in data walls, think about ways that you can be using the Brightpath data to create data walls that will lead to really meaningful discussions about how your students are going. Think about ways that you can set up the data that will really help you evaluate if your teaching's been successful. And importantly, think about ways that you can be sharing the assessment information with the students so that they know what it is that they're working on and what they're working towards. The final piece of advice I would say is think about planning a schedule of assessment. When do you want to collect whole school data? When you're within our knowledge base, do a search on schedule for assessments and you'll be able to see our template. and you can see how you can collect the data at different terms to really help you with your teaching and assessment cycle. So you're good to go. I think you'll find Brightpath really straightforward. Just know that for the writing, you need to take time to get to know the exemplars. For the reports, take time to work out how you can get the most from your reports. Need any help? Brightpath@brightpath.com.au is the email address to use. And remember, there's a wealth of information in our knowledge base.